Now in this video, we're looking at the story of you. Who decides it? Is it you, or was the story of who you are, the notion of your character, the true nature of yourself? Was it decided by you, or has it been decided for you by a facade-driven family system? That's the theme of this particular video. In facade-driven family systems, authenticity is not part of the system. You playing your role, you performing for the greater narrative of the family is much more important than any authenticity. When you're authentic, it may well be punished or most likely simply ignored. When you play your part well, it's rewarded, and when you play your part badly, it's disrewarded or punished accordingly. Now, that failure to adhere to the performance may well now become a very thing that starts to shape the feedback you get from other people. Failure to do so is you are the wicked child. Your failure to be performing, your failure to actually be part of that system, and to basically your attempt at being authentic is a sign of your moral failings. It's a sign of the kind of child you are. It's a sign of the kind of person that you happen to be, that we have to put up with, and we don't have to put up with this behavior. You know, the sort of stuff. So quite often this narrative that gets given, it's not an sit down, tell you the narrative, now you must memorize that. It unfolds over time. It's an incremental, feedback-based information that happens over large tracts of time. And largely it's your attempts at being authentic get framed negativistically. So now what can happen is that when you're now older, your authenticity is the evidence, not of authenticity, but your core failure as a person. This is where people have deep internal shame. People spend a lot of time beating themselves up over their performance in social interactions, that kind of stuff. Replaying micro social moments, tiny little details, that little tone of voice, that little glance here and there, that hesitation that you now die inside 1,000 times as you relive those moments that are absolutely inconsequential and no one else cares about. But you have been trained by the facade-driven family system in order to have that notion of yourself. So now, those tiny micro moments become evidence for why you are no good. You are a bad person, weak person, vulnerable person, a schmuck, whatever it is, because it didn't fit the narrative of the family and the feedback you got at the time. So this is what we're going to do. Let's pull up the first slide. So we've titled this one, Pathological Identity, Imposition, and the Erasure of the Self. I know it sounds way more technical than it actually is. Now, we have to bear in mind there's this thing about psychology, which is when we pathologize everyday behaviors, it sounds all very terribly clinical, and that everyone's sitting around calculating and planning this and so forth. That's not how things work. Most people are just acting emotively, reactively, and so forth. And most of these behaviors and these systems are emergent qualities of people's basic fundamental stresses, distresses, and their own hang-ups and issues and so forth. And they're emergent qualities. They're not necessarily things that are calculated and conscious. Often when we talk about these things, it sounds like we're describing family pathologies like everyone's a calculating psychopath. That is not how it works, which is why when we actually challenge them on those behaviors, everyone just denies it, because no one's intending this. There's a split between people's intentions of how they act and the actual emergent behaviors that come from that within those systems. And so one of the reasons why people can just deny this is ever happening within their own family is because no one is consciously aware of it. And that's key. So please remember that as we talk about these things in detail. It's not like we're talking about a family of psychopaths. They might appear it to you, but the reality is to everybody else, they probably just seem like normal people. And that's key. But it's also one of the things that makes it so difficult. Because your experience, you see the dark side, you see the what's wrong, and everyone else just sees the normal family with you making a fuss. And that increases the alienation, of course. So who decides the saw review? Is it you, or is it others deciding on your behalf? And here we're going to explore the destructive dynamics of facade-driven family systems that preemptively dictate and enforce a specific identity upon a chosen member, systematically denying them authentic self-definition. Okay, so family systems and the need for stability over growth. Now, this is key. This is key. Now, in some families, maintaining truce, maintaining peace, maintaining some kind of illusion of harmony is much more important than actually knowing each other, dealing with the difficulties, and growing as a family. Some people have this notion in life that everything is preset. That's why they can never express ignorance. They can never show vulnerability or a failure to understand something. They have to be know-it-alls about absolutely everything. And they're never, ever wrong. Because in their world, everything is preset and preformed. There is no growth and learning. And this is where Carol Dweck's work comes in brilliantly, which is the sort of the growth mindset over the fixed mindset. An awful lot of people have been raised to have the fixed mindset, and then they bring that into the family systems and then how those things get governed. So now maintaining stability, maintaining truce, maintaining harmony, even though we may not like each other. We only had children because we wanted to improve our marriage. We weren't happy together, so we thought, what can we do to make us happy? I know, we'll have some children. Brilliant. Now, a lot of families start like that. They really do. And a lot of families, couples start off in fairly stressful relationships that aren't really going anywhere. And then the pregnancy comes along, wasn't intended. So there's lots of families that are created, not by design. They're created just by simple biology and then the consequences of that. So the stress is preloaded into the system, and now we add children into the mix. And then all the economic burdens and stuff that come with that, it's problematic. So now, in order for us to get along with each other, because we still have to live together, etc., we may not have the opportunity to separate and so forth. For whatever reasons, whether it's moralistic reasoning, duty, or simply economic and possibilities, we now have to maintain this way of actually getting along with each other. So we have this stability requirement rather than a developmental growth requirement, if that makes sense. Now, in the Bowen family systems theory, the family functions as an emotional unit governed by invisible yet powerful forces that prioritize system stability. It maintains a homeostasis. In pathological systems, there is this need for balance is absolute and rigid. So it's not unreasonable that we maintain peace, we maintain homeostasis, we maintain some kind of balance within the family system, within any group. You've got to maintain morale. You've got to maintain some kind of order. That's realistic. That's realistic. But when it becomes absolute and rigid, you, the person growing up inside that system, who may well now have differentiations from that, that is going to be a threat. And so differentiation is banned. Now, got to give you the distinctions here between differentiation and individuation. Now, differentiation is a lifelong process of separating one's own emotional and intellectual self from the family system. It's viewed as a fundamental threat within these sort of facade-driven families. And then we have individuation. So let me give you a very easy example of differentiation. Standard teenage rebellion, when the kids start dressing in a way that directly contradicts the cultural norms. And it does amuse me. I remember back in the 80s, as when we were kids, the kids started wearing baseball caps. British kids were wearing baseball caps, and it was a shock to everybody. And then once that had settled into a norm, then they started putting them backwards. And I remember the amazing level of conversation around the kids today, and they're daring to wear baseball caps because they're American. And then they started wearing them sideways. We've had every form, whether you're looking at all the music trends, whether you're looking at the kids wearing their baggy trousers down around their knees. It doesn't matter what it is. There's always going to be something that the kids do that go, I'm not this, as in the parents' normalities. I'm not this. I'm this instead. It's a statement of differentiation. And that's pretty much all that is. And they will always find a way, and it's often done through hairstyles, music trends, and so forth. That is the absolute classic way that that's done. I would argue that to a large degree, the whole non-binary movement and all that kind of stuff, the genderqueer movement, the neuroqueer movement, all those things that happened recently, that was nothing more than a standard set of differentiations that the kids brought in reaction to the norms they were being taught within the educational systems. Not entirely, not 100% the case, but I think that was largely what was going on. And for whatever reason, people in authorities fell for it, because within that, there is a very real phenomena going on that is separate to the whole trans thing, the non-binary thing, and all that kind of stuff. But they all got lumped together. Madness. Anyway, that's differentiation. And the child changes their name, they change the way they dress, and all that kind of stuff. Now, individuation is where now I individuate, like I'm a seed that I've budded away from the tree, and I'm now putting down my own roots and growing separately. So now, I could individuate, but never differentiate, because I may well fit in well with the family system and all of those kind of things. And, some families actually like each other. I know that might come as a shock to some of you. They actually look forward to talking to each other, that kind of stuff. It's not a stress, and they don't walk on eggshells around each other. Those are people who often don't need to do differentiation because they all get along. And so, but they can still individuate, move away, start their own families, and so forth. Now, some people will differentiate but never manage individuation. And some people individuate and have never needed to differentiate. In facade-driven, rigid family systems, differentiation and individuation are not permitted because they challenge the status quo of the system. And that's key, unless that differentiation role is that person embracing the role that has been assigned to them within the family. Let me give an example. They may have been assigned the emotionally morose, withdrawn one, because after all these years of parental feedback, the parents finally broke them, and they're now morose and withdrawn. And they adopt a fashion trend, whether it's the emo trend or whatever. I'm old now, I don't know what the trends are. But they adopt the niche within that youth culture that actually embraces those very qualities. That may not be punished or disrewarded by the family system. Right, let's come to the next one. The curated narrative, a defensive construction. Now, the imposition of an identity is rarely accidental. It's a defensive mechanism. It's a regulatory thing that basically says you are challenging the system here, so now we are going to defend it by framing you in a certain way. So the family actively curates a distorted narrative of the target member, ranging from being you're the problem child, you've always been difficult. I remember you when you were a baby. You were always a challenging baby. You were always the difficult one. Or what they might do is they flip it. So they're framing you to be the problem child now, but they tell you that you were once such a lovely baby, and you were gorgeous, and you were so easy. You were the easiest baby that's ever existed. You're the most perfect baby that's ever been born. But look at you now. And all you did was say, go and smoke a cigarette or something when you were 10 or whatever it is. Now you're being framed, but you're being held up against an impossible ideal of the perfect baby. Or you were always a problem. You were a breech birth. You put your mother through hell when you were born. That kind of stuff. So now, right from the outset, the child is being framed to be the problem child. There's something a senior midwife told me a number of years ago, that she observed something when the baby is born and they're handed to the father. Now, classically, birthing a child is quite a stressful event. Now, by the time the mother has squeezed the baby out and been through just that unimaginable, they are now relieved, and they will hold that child, and there's a natural thing about how women will hold their child. And of course, the staff are very experienced in holding that newborn baby. And then they go, Dad, would you like to hold baby? And Dad goes, and tenses up. And now he holds that baby without that nurturing, soft suppleness. He's rigid. And quite often the baby goes, Rah! And pushes. And dad is like, don't know what to do, don't know what to do. He's stressed, and the child is pushing him by pushing out with hands and feet, or now screaming. Hand screaming little thing back to mother. Child calms down. Dad, in that moment, makes the assessment, this child doesn't like me. The seed is set, the seed is sown, the frame is set, and now forevermore there may well be a problem. And that happens in that little moment there, just in that little moment, a knowing has happened inside somebody's head. Now, how true that is and what long-term consequence, but in a facade-driven, dysfunctional family system, that's a beginning of a whole bunch of other stuff that's going to be following. Now, these roles from things like problem child, the eternal failure, that's a good one. Some of you will relate to being the eternal failure. Nothing you ever do works. To the, you're the hero or the marriage savior. You're supposed to make mother happy. You're supposed to be the one that fixes our marriage. You're the one who's supposed to make us proud. There's a big one. Where everything the child does is met with parental pride. Whoa. But the parents doing that don't know that that's a problem because they think that's a good thing to be proud of their kids and to go on about how proud they are. Yeah. No, once in a while it's fine. That's not a thing. But where that's the pathology, that's the default response set. The child is now locked into eliciting parental pride. This is what? This is one of the deadly sins. Just saying. Or the eternal child, the child that's never allowed to grow up. The child that is kept infantilized and talked to like they're 5, even though they might be 45, but parents still talk to them like they're 5 and have the expectation set of their capacity in the world, their functionality in the world, as though I remember what you were like when you were at school. Now, do you remember that time that, and they bring out the litany of failures that the child had, and so forth, and why they have to be governed so carefully. Now, those roles within the family are different from the chosen roles for life. Like, so we might frame you to be the eternal child, but we are going to raise you to be a doctor. And we all know, anyone that's worked in the health service know exactly what happens next. Oh yeah, they become surgeons. Or lawyers, that kind of stuff. So we have now, there can be conflict, which is we set you up for failure and we assign you a role from which we will derive pride in the world. And that can create conflicts. Now, internally, what is happening to that individual's experience of themselves? They experience themselves in a particular way, and they may start to learn and highlight their own failures. They might start to see that when they attempt to do stuff, they need to have recourse to have somebody help them because they never learn to develop these things themselves because they've taken on a belief formation of how useless and fundamentally bad they are. Now, other stuff can happen too. The child may start to show signs of individuation by doing actions to favor other people, acts of kindness, acts of generosity. That's them being a schmuck. When that child is doing something that basically brings attention to them, the parents will go, you're being taken advantage of. Why would they do that? You're being a schmuck. You're being a fool. You're being naive. You're being misled. They will start to frame the child's reaching out for kindness to other people. They'll experience that as a moral failing of themselves because we're the ones who are supposed to be doing that, not our children. And so they will disarm that capacity within the child. So now what starts to happen is when that child as an adult looks back upon their life, when they see anything good of themselves, it's framed as a moral weakness, a moral failing on their part. But of course, when they have misbehaved, those things have been met with, as mentioned in the previous video, a disproportionate asymmetrical response. So now their failings, their actual failings are massively highlighted, and their actual generosity of character is framed to be negative. This can be hugely damaging. Now, this is something I've just got to say here. Again, just to highlight, it's realistic to assume that no family member has active insight into these group behaviors. Okay, these things aren't consciously performed, but they're habitual and relenting. And of course, the child is never allowed to give meta-commentary about them because that is to be critical of the parent. And as highlighted in the previous video, that is forbidden. There is no feedback. You do as you're told. You don't speak to me like that, etc., etc. Okay, so now we've got the denial of counter-narratives, narrative sealing, and coercive control. When the target member resists their imposed identity, they resist it. Maybe by asserting a different memory. No, Dad, that's not what happened. You're now disagreeing. You're not allowed to disagree with father. They may assert a different memory. They may assert a different feeling, a different career path. They introduce systemic anxiety. Essentially, you must not criticize mum. You must not criticize dad. To go against them is now to highlight all of the other stuff in the facade. They won't tolerate that. So any deviation from what you're supposed to be, you will be what we tell you to be without question. You're not allowed to question, and you're not allowed to be anything else. And any attempt on your part to be anything else will be punished. Whenever you initiate something that conforms to the identity we give you, we will reward that behavior or reinforce that behavior. When you try to individuate or differentiate, no. The facade-driven family will not permit that. The system's response is often immediate and total denial. So you say, well, I remember blah, 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 blah. That is now you making stuff up. That's you telling stories. That's you telling tales. That's you misremembering. Why are you being like this? Why do you make this stuff up? Why do you tell these stories? Because we all have a completely different narrative and you're conflicting with it. So now this is where the gaslighting starts to kick in. So these are basically tools of coercive control. And crucially, what follows may be communicated entirely through attitude, tone, and non-verbal presupposition rather than explicit statement. Because the child is now so well trained into the non-verbal conduct, most of the time these things are just ignored, but a scoff, a tut, a cluck of the tongue, a pursed lip, a stress face that just flashes across for a microsecond that the child witnesses just to communicate the potential for what could happen next. Yeah, it's all there. And mockery is the other one. Mockery and gaslighting go hand in hand, but mockery is a very common tool, particularly from the other siblings who are reinforcing the role for you. The siblings can now scoff and bully and mock you. When they do that, nothing happens. When you complain about it, stop your whining, stop your noise, stop your whinging, stop complaining, stop telling tales, stop whatever. You're not allowed to stop that behavior. But any attempt on your behavior to do so is now further evidence of your moral failings because you're always whining. And you know why you're always whining? Because you are ungrateful. The number one thing that we can just throw at any child who we want to completely denigrate. You are just ungrateful. And now we can flip it back to us being the victims. After all we do for you, we have to put up with you. We have been listening to you whining all day. Dismissal, tone policing as well can come in, as mentioned in the previous video. And now we've got the narrative sealed. It's the closed loop. Right, next one. Depressing, this isn't it? Right, core harm, epistemic trauma, and the erosion of self. Right, so the deepest harm lies not in the false accusation alone, but in the systematic erosion of individuals' ability to trust their own mind. That's where the damage takes place. The moment you start to doubt yourself, the moment your security of who you are is taken away from you, good luck. Now, good luck. Don't worry, there'll be therapists out there who will now reinforce this. You'll get medication, you'll get to talk about it, you'll have some counselling. You'll be told things like, well, not everyone is as lucky as you are to have two parents. There are people worse off than you. You just need to have a positive mindset. And if you learn to communicate and listen to your parents, then they will learn and communicate. There is this gaslighting goes on. It's astonishing. You can be anything you want to be. therapists will now reinforce the same nonsense that your parents gave you. So in epistemic trauma is the shattering of a person's confidence in their own perceptions, memory, and sense of truth, i.e. it's caused by primary caregivers who consistently refute their reality. Now, this is key as well. Now note that verbalized counter-narrative reassurance is sometimes offered, whilst the false narrative is simultaneously maintained non-verbally, compounding the confusion. What would that look like? So, we now, as a system, put you in the role that you are useless. You can't do anything, and basically we can't trust you, and we regularly feed back to you every failing you've ever made, and some of them will be true, and some of them won't be. Now, in a point of crisis, you come to us, and I'm no good, I'm useless, I'm hopeless, I'll never do anything. Right, so you come to us in that state. So you finally break, and now we give you a hug. Oh, don't. You'll be okay. Every child goes through periods of self-doubt. Everyone worries that they won't be any good. It could be that we have basically communicated to you, you are completely unlovable and you'll be on your own forever, for example. And now as a younger teenager, no one ever likes me, I haven't got any friends, and no one fancies me. All this teenage stuff of being lonely as a teenager. Oh, come here. Oh, you're a good-looking lad. You'll find the right person one day. Don't listen to those other kids. You just haven't found your people. Whilst we simultaneously alienate and isolate you and cripple your social interactions. Now that is a real headfuck, and that is a very, very common thing we'll see. We will even see that in direct, overt, abusive families, where you have people who are using sexual or physical violence against particular targeted members, and then that person is also full of sorrow and, oh, come here, oh, blah, blah, and yet it still continues. This is probably what they talk about in trauma bonding and stuff like that. Everything I've ever seen of trauma bonding is just never makes any sense to me. So this kind of double standard is operating simultaneously. So you have to go to them, but you better be grateful for it. You better be grateful, because your ingratitude is why we have such a challenge with you. That's the ultimate one we can go to. Right, next. So the devastating effects. So what are the consequences of all this, right? We've got internalized shame. And you'll know if you suffer internalized shame. You will replay social interactions, micro moments of social discourse, and social conversations are clumsy. I mean, if you notice how many times conversations break, and then a story gets halfway through, and then it gets interrupted, and then the conversation goes over there. It just lurches all over the place. It's not very clean narrative that trained professionals seem to think happens. It's all very, very messy. But when you're in the middle of that, you will replay the bits where you've lost it, or you've broken it, or you interrupted, or you failed to. Replay those events and experience great horrors and shames. And classically, this is the person who wakes up in the morning after a social event the night before, and they wake up with the horrors, reliving every moment they've had. And this is also why people will mask these things with alcohol, and that's why alcohol is a great social lubricant. Because you get to a certain point of alcohol intoxication where no one cares anymore, these things don't matter. And then it just goes beyond a threshold, and then it starts to matter again. So chronic self-doubt is another one. If you can't trust your own feelings, you don't trust your own decisions, you don't trust yourself in any capacity, that's a real big problem in life generally. And then we have the sort of the more pathological stuff, like your complex PTSD and dissociative issues, where the person is just in denial. They're a seething mass of awfulness on the inside of themselves. They are depressed, they have low self-esteem, they're crushed, but they're smiling their way through their day. Smile, smile, smile. Upbeat tone. Oh, lovely. All the upbeat tonalities, all of the upbeat social demeanors, was internally dying. And that is so common. I have lost count of how many clients have presented themselves to me They send me the assessment form, and it is just a litany of awfulness. And when they arrive, they're all smiles and graces and all the rest of it, and they know how to present themselves to make a good impression. Because in facade-driven families, making a good impression is the most important thing that goes on. When other people are there, you must all play your part to make a good impression. They are not interested in reputation because everything's about the immediacy. Reputation is when people get to know you over time. They get to know the sort of person you are. They get to know your character. In facade-driven families, that depth is never permitted. And that's why it can be like Groundhog Day whenever you are in those people. Why do you have to explain it every single time? Every single time you meet them, every single family gathering, you have to explain yourself all over again. It is like you're all complete strangers to each other, but you know how to play the game. That is because depth is never permitted. That would involve reputation. That actually involves getting to know each other. This is all about facade. This is about creating impression. So the person arrives, all blah, 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 all la-da-di-da. I've seen their assessment form, and I'm pretty good at getting them into reality quite quickly, and they just break down and cry. And sometimes they'll cry for a very long time because it's the first time someone has seen through their facade, has seen through their attempt to make a good impression, actually to see the real person behind it. And it's the private inner world that people have often is not what you see on the surface. And that's very common consequence from facade-driven families. All right, so we've now got the issue of the identified patient carrying the family's hidden dysfunction. So now in clinical family therapy, the identified patient, or IP, is the member who unconsciously carries the visible symptoms of the family's hidden dysfunction. The family unites around the narrative that this is the person who is the problem. They're basically the scapegoat for the family. They're the sick one, the crazy one, the mad one, the one who's always been a bit difficult, the one you've got to be careful with, the one you have to tiptoe around. Everyone now focuses on that identified patient. Because as long as we can hold them as the reason why we have problems, none of us have to deal with our problems with each other. We can just keep that focus on the other person. Now, the identified patient serves as an indispensable protective function. By hyper-focusing the IP's perceived flaws and crises, the rest of the family, particularly the parental figures, they entirely avoid confronting their own deep-seated issues. Their marital discord, their own latent narcissism, the intergenerational trauma that they're carrying because they've probably come from a shit family themselves where there's been all sorts of stuff going. Incest, intergenerational incest only happens to everyone else's families. It never happens in our families because we must never talk about our own families negatively. That's a rule. We must always maintain a narrative that our family is a good one. It's other families. And yet what is the percentage of people that have experienced child abuse from family members? It's horrendous. But apparently no family has it. No, every family is in denial about it. And that's one of the mechanisms that enables it to continue, of course, because no one's talking about it. So in order to put a stop to it happening. Emotional immaturity is a big one as well. Some people are just incredibly emotionally immature. It doesn't matter if they're 50. It doesn't matter if they're 60. They're just very emotionally immature because they've never had the depth of interaction with people. All of their relationships are incredibly facade-driven. They're incredibly shallow and incredibly superficial, and most commonly temporary. So there's no longevity to any of their friendships or their relationships with other people. That temporary nature, because once that proximity starts to close, they enter proximity panic. I'll do a video on that another time. And with proximity panic, they take flight and end that relationship, end that transaction, end that employment, whatever it is. I can speak autobiographically on that one. That defined me for many years of my life. So basically, the identified patient is sacrificed. It sounds quite dramatic, this, but they're effectively sacrificed to maintain the illusion of systemic health everywhere else. So if you're the identified patient, You're the problem in the family. It's not them. It's you. You're absorbing the collective anxiety. You deflect from parental dysfunction. You preserve the family's self-image, and you become the singular explanation for all the family problems. No one would have any problems if it wasn't for you, or if you just weren't like this. Stop being like this. Why are you like this? That kind of stuff. Right, I've got loads more slides here. I think I'm going to wrap it up on this one. We'll save the rest for another video. Right, the scapegoat mechanism. Closely related to the identified patient is the scapegoat. And the scapegoat is typically punished, marginalized, and actively rejected, acting as the psychic receptacle for the family's shadow. It's very Jungian, this, isn't it? There are unacknowledged anger, failures, and toxic shame. So there's a systemic projection. Traits the family despises in themselves are projected onto the scapegoat. A family relying on covert aggression labels the scapegoat as angry or abusive. An anxious family label the scapegoat as being the anxious one, and so on. And if that scapegoat basically starts to get better, they start to recover, they start to heal, that is a threat to the family system. Now, anyone that has worked in psychiatry, especially when we're talking what I call residential psychiatry, so people are living in the unit, whether it's a long stay residential unit or whether it's sort of a ward-based, and they go home on leave. So you actually can get people who have had some horrendous levels of dysfunction, whether it's from the mental illness side of stuff. They have really crossed the threshold into mental illness. And with medication, a good environment, and good interaction with staff and fellow patients and so forth, massive progress can be made. And I've seen people make enormous progress, which is great to see. And then they go home on weekend leave. And I've known in one particular unit, there was you prep for the Monday morning when they would be dropped off by their parents. Now, bear in mind, these were people in their 40s and 50s being dropped off by elderly parents. When they would be dropped off on the Monday morning back to the unit, yep, good luck. That rest of that Monday and most of that night, Monday night and Tuesday morning, they're going to be very stressful because you send back home a fairly functional person and you receive back an utterly dysfunctional one. Now, it wasn't everybody, but it was often enough that it was a well-recognized phenomena. And that is simply because they are showing normal behaviors, and those normal behaviors are not rewarded by the family. The abnormal ones are. And so there's subtle manipulations that take place with that. Right, I'm going to stop that one there because I've got so many more slides, but I've realized that this is getting silly. We'll be here for days if I carry on with this. I'll save the rest for another video. As always, comment section below. If you've made it this far, congratulations. I thank you so much. But do click the like button, please. It's always useful. It helps the algorithm and all the rest of it. I'll see you in the next one.